Take it, I don't want it. The Russians were offered to take out mortgages for apartments on the secondary housing market. You might ask, what does this have to do with us? The thing is, they were even offered mortgages in cities that Russian forces were never able to capture. And this is at a time when Trump and Putin spoke and agreed on a 30-day ceasefire.
The Russian world has no borders. It is everywhere where the cultural, informational, military, economic, ideological, or humanitarian influence of Russia penetrates in one way or another. That is, on all continents. The concentration of this influence varies by region, but nowhere is it zero. So, we will expand in all directions, and from there, we'll see how God provides and how far the resources can stretch. The main thing is not to overdo it, not to take on too heavy a trophy that we won't be able to carry.
Hello, my name is Kateryna Solyar and there will be no usual countdown of time, because here, as in a vacuum, only one time is frozen 24 hours left. Or is it better to say March 24th? Because that's when the United States will hold indirect negotiations between Ukraine and Russia in Saudi Arabia. So-called technical groups will be sent to Saudi Arabia for these so-called indirect negotiations, where both sides come but stay in different rooms. Basically, you say, all right, what are your terms? Then, you turn to the other side and ask, what are your terms? And essentially, it's shuttle diplomacy between rooms in Riyadh, said U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg. And if I'm not mistaken, this is the first time Kellogg has commented on both Ukraine and Russia.
Since last Sunday or Saturday, he is no longer Trump's special representative for the Russian-Ukrainian war, but has taken on a completely new role as special representative for Ukraine. This is his position now, and Trump even congratulated him on this new appointment. I don't want to congratulate you on your dismissal from the previous position, but I do congratulate you on your new one. Many media outlets wrote that this change was at the request of the Russians, who were not satisfied with Keith Kellogg because, they say, he had a pro-Ukrainian stance. He has a position that, among other things, defends international law. So, essentially, the Russians weren't happy with that. And judging by everything, Witkoff seems to have a position that defends the interests of developers, not international law. So, most likely, things will go much worse because Kellogg can't move between the rooms, and the Russians are not ready to talk to him. That is, Kellogg will enter the Ukrainian room, then there will be a third room where Kellogg holds talks with Witkoff, you see? They talk, and then Witkoff goes to the Russians. And is it realistic that we'll agree on anything? Of course not. It's simply impossible in such a format. What can be agreed upon in such a format? No, most likely, it will be announced that they agreed to stop striking something. Something very small or 3 specific targets. I don't know. Maybe 2, maybe 1. Maybe 1 target in the Black Sea. But it's very hard to agree when, and what's the point, and why they couldn't speak directly.
Kellogg also spoke about the argument in the Oval Office.
Zelensky didn't listen to what we were telling him. He started lecturing the president. And we had already told him before, you're dealing with a different person. This gentleman is not Joe Biden.
I think this was the first time President Zelensky realized that he was dealing with someone who knows the press better than he does, said Kellogg. And here I understand that I'm looking at this situation from the perspective of a Ukrainian. And I just can't be objective, but as a Ukrainian, I can't stay silent. You've already written to me that I should respect Keith Kellogg because he is definitely on Ukraine's side and has supported us repeatedly. However,
this is all formal nonsense. He was removed because he had a falling out with Malafeev. He is one of Putin's key oligarchs and one of his main financial backers, who, among other things, provided funding for the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine as early as 2014. They had no idea how everything would ultimately unfold, and all the initial expenses of Gherkin and his gang were fully covered by Malafeev. And the paradox lies in the fact that Kellogg did not suffer the consequences for his pro-Ukrainian stance, but rather for defending Trump, because Malafeev openly challenged the Americans and Trump himself, asserting that they wouldn't accomplish anything and that everything would be done on his terms. In response, Kellogg bluntly told him to crawl back into his booth and keep his mouth shut. And that's when this whole story started, with the Russians saying they wouldn't talk to Kellogg. It's not about his pro-Ukrainian stance. Then Kellogg went on to prove this repeatedly. We remember well how he genuinely tried to please, making every effort to demonstrate that he was a true radical Trumpist. He even went so far as to compare us to children, claiming that talking to Ukrainians felt like having a conversation with his own grandchildren. Then he stated that aid and intelligence were cut off from Ukraine as a way to teach him a lesson, comparing it to hitting a donkey on the head to grab its attention. And here's this story again. They're really trying hard to please, so they don't fall out of favor. They share this unfortunate situation with Rubio. The thing is, they're not truly aligned with it. Trumpism is not genuinely their sincere position. They are putting in a lot of effort to appear as if they are Trumpists in order to maintain their hold on power, but in doing so, they only manage to look utterly pathetic.
Not everyone who wears a suit is necessarily a gentleman. And secondly, what does it mean to be a person who knows the press better? The Pentagon has repeatedly stated that the US did not provide $350 billion in aid to Ukraine, but Trump continues to stand by his statement. The CIA has debunked the synchronized statements of Trump and Putin, claiming that Ukrainian soldiers recently retreated from the Kursk region but were not surrounded by Russian troops. Reuters reported this, but American intelligence shared this assessment with the White House last week. However, US President Donald Trump continued to insist that Ukrainian forces were surrounded in the Kursk region. On March 13, Putin claimed that Ukrainian forces in the Kursk region were cut off and would either have to surrender or die. On March 14, Trump said he had asked Putin to spare the lives of thousands of Ukrainians, knowing the truth, who, according to him, were completely surrounded and vulnerable. Trump then repeated his statement about Ukrainian forces being surrounded on March 17 and 18. So, how are we supposed to conduct negotiations and not react to open disinformation? Also, explain to me, is it gentlemanly to give your word and then take it back? Because when Trump was running for office, he said that the war would end in 24 hours. I'll say something to Zelensky, something to Putin, and the war ends. But then it turned out he didn't mean that. And now, after saying something to Zelensky, Trump knows that Ukraine supports the establishment of both peace and a 30-day ceasefire. But after saying something to Putin, Trump realized that he wants to end the war, but since he has the power and resources, he will continue to kill and destroy Ukrainian land. Moreover, as I mentioned, he has even started to take control of it. The Dom.RF website has published a list of cities where Russians will be able to purchase secondary housing under the preferential mortgage program from April 1st. These cities have low construction volumes, with at most 2 multi-apartment buildings by early 2025. As it turned out, dozens of Ukrainian cities were included in the list of secondary housing. Not only those in the occupied territories but also those turned into ruins. Among the cities on the list are Ukrainian Donetsk, Kherson, Avdiivka, Chasiv Yar, and Bakhmut. Street fighting is currently ongoing in Donetsk. The other cities lie in ruins after many months of battles and bombings. Ukrainian cities like Kherson, Berislav, Slavyansk, and Kramatorsk are under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces. Russia considers Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia regions as its own. Zaporizhzhia, the capital of the partially occupied Ukrainian region, is not on the list for family mortgages. Secondary housing is available in Sudra, Kursk region, previously controlled by Ukrainian armed forces for over 6 months. Fighting is still ongoing near the city, and during the occupation, Sudra suffered severe damage. Just recently, the Russians hit a gas pipeline with artillery, creating an eternal flame in the city. Civilians are banned from entering. But at the same time, apartments are sold there. And against this backdrop, we are supposed to talk about peace. Or about business. Because it seems that in these discussions, what has taken the forefront is not shelling, nor even the occupation of land, but the nuclear issue.
Trump says, let's talk, we need to fill the agreement. And he is changing it now. Not to our benefit. Even the Financial Times is warning about this, saying you're squeezing the wrong country. Right now, no one is forcing Russia to do anything. The Ukrainians have left the Kursk region, the United States is no longer helping with war crimes investigations, and the US is easing sanctions pressure. Trump promised to drop oil prices, and he reduced them by 20 cents. But now he's trying to extract more from Ukraine. Trump is going full throttle, having conflicts with the courts, and he's dismantling the system of checks and balances. He's even pushing Conor McGregor to run for president. 2 days after meeting with Trump, the former boxer is already ready to be a presidential candidate. Today, he made a statement that he will run for president. By the way, he even made a joke this morning, suggesting that Conor McGregor might have accidentally revealed the secret of who could potentially be Trump's candidate in Ukraine. But for now, the main candidate for Trump is the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which he wants to take for himself. And he's not talking about management, but ownership. Zelensky said, "You can repair it, you can manage it a bit, but it all belongs to the people of Ukraine." Russia captured it terroristically, and now Trump is trying to take it for himself.
So the US wants to include control over nuclear power plants in the agreement on Ukraine's natural resources. This was reported by the Financial Times, citing sources. Washington is pushing for Kyiv to agree to clear ownership and management rules for a joint investment fund, as well as a broader agreement that could include American ownership of other economic assets, including nuclear power plants. Just recently, President Zelensky denied that he had discussed with the US president the possibility of transferring ownership of the Zaporizhzhia or any other nuclear power plant in Ukraine to the United States. Ukraine is considering only modernization and investment. Ukrainian officials have also stated that the text of the agreement on natural resources is already finalized and does not need changes. Western media have repeatedly reported alleged changes to the agreement and growing US demands with each passing day. You know, it feels like everything Russia hasn't destroyed, Donald Trump wants to take under his wing. But he wants to take, without offering any guarantees. As you remember, the argument remains that if Americans are present in Ukraine, then Russia will not attack these enterprises or facilities. But are you saying there were no American companies in Crimea or eastern Ukraine in 2014? Of course, there were. Did that stop Russia? Of course not. And this time, it won't either. Because force can only be countered with another force. I mean a military presence. And now, it seems like even Macron and Starmer are starting to backtrack.
Starmer with Macron. They promised us troops from their countries, and now they're saying, listen, maybe we can give you UN forces instead? Both know UN forces can be blocked due to Security Council votes, with Russian and US veto power. If there is not Belarus or China, then they will be blocked. A strange position from two European leaders who have scheduled a full-scale meeting for Thursday. Starmer vowed to supply Ukraine with fighter jets. He's still sticking to the first scenario. Macron, on the other hand, is leaning more toward the UN option. Starmer insists troops need air protection when deployed. Brings a tear to the eye, because when we begged for air cover for our troops, we were told, learn English. At least 2 years. Because Biden wanted them to communicate with him in English. Our guys said, we studied English in school, at university, we know it. Just give us the planes. No, 2 years of language courses first. Now, apparently, there's no need to learn English, or even Ukrainian. Fighter jets are expected soon. The plan might change any time.
Just yesterday, we were talking about how Macron was starting to surpass Trump in leadership qualities, and it seems we jinxed it. The president of France is now considering sending peacekeepers to Ukraine under UN command. The Telegraph is now writing about this. The Telegraph reports that Emmanuel Macron discussed this idea with UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres during the European Council meeting on March 20th. The Telegraph confirms the discussion occurred but doesn't mention Guterres's reaction. The publication notes that UN peacekeeping deployment requires UN Security Council approval. So in this context, the chances of it happening seem slim. Because Russia, and possibly the United States, would likely oppose it. And after listing all of this, tell me, how is it even possible for the US State Department to be so certain that Ukraine and Russia are closer than ever to reaching a ceasefire?
We are just one step away from a complete cessation of hostilities, and then we can talk not just about peace for a week or 6 months, but a lasting peace that people in Ukraine, Russia, and around the world can count on. This is what America has helped secure, and this is what we continue to work on every day. We have never been closer to peace with these two sides.
On March 20th, Ukraine was attacked by more than 200 strike drones. A massive assault targeted Odessa. Civilian infrastructure and commercial buildings came under enemy fire, and 3 teenagers were injured. And meanwhile, Trump is threatening prison time. Not for Putin, but for those who offend Musk and Tesla.
People caught sabotaging Tesla could face up to 20 years in prison, and this punishment could extend to their sponsors as well. We are looking for you.
A French scientist was denied entry to the United States for criticizing Trump in private messages. A French scientist has been banned from entering the United States due to critical messages about US President Donald Trump's policies. These messages were found during a phone inspection. This was reported by Le Monde, citing a statement from France's Minister of Education, Philippe Baptiste. According to reports, the incident took place on March 9, when an unnamed French space science researcher underwent a selective security check upon arrival in the US. Federal agents searched his work computer and personal phone. Philippe Baptiste stated that the scientist was on his way to a conference near Houston but was denied entry at the border and subsequently deported. US authorities allegedly took this action because the researcher's phone contained conversations with colleagues and friends in which he expressed personal opinions about Trump's research policies. The scientist was reportedly accused of messages that were deemed hostile toward Trump and could be characterized as a security threat. His professional and personal equipment was confiscated, and the FBI launched an investigation. However, the charges were later dropped. Meanwhile, French MEP Raphael Glucksmann recently called on the US to return the Statue of Liberty, arguing that the American government no longer upholds the values of freedom. The statue was presented as a gift by France in 1886, symbolizing the strong friendship between the two nations. In response to this, Trump's spokesperson, Caroline Leavitt, remarked that if it hadn't been for the United States, the French would likely be speaking German today. It seems that America is focusing on the wrong priorities. Of course, we could blame this on Mercury retrograde, but even Mercury appears to be in shock over global politics. Hold on tight, and see you in the next 24